Can we have a listener competition for the most crazy, playful idea?
Yes.
And they'll win Kendra's billions of dollars from her dystopian universe?
I will make a certificate that looks like a $1 billion bill and mail it to the winner.
I love it. I absolutely love it.
You are listening to the Down the Wormhole podcast, exploring the strange and fascinating relationship between science and religion. This week, our hosts are...
My name is Adam Pryor. I teach at Bethany College in Kansas. My favorite childhood PE game was, I guess, in general, rolling around on the little tiny scooters on the gym floor. It didn't matter what the game was. Yes. It was just getting to use the scooters that was the best part.
I'm Kendra Holtmore, PhD student at Boston University, and my favorite PE game was the parachute game, where everyone stands in a circle and lifts the parachute into the air, and then you hurry and sit underneath the parachute and pull it down behind you, so everyone's sitting in a nice balloon bubble of parachute. And I sometimes pretend that I'm playing that game when me and my husband make our bed in the morning with our comforter. I don't think he likes that game as much as
I do. Rachel Jackson, rabbi at Agudas Israel Congregation in Hendersonville, North Carolina. And my favorite PE game when I was a kid was tetherball.
I'm Zach Jackson, UCC pastor in Reading, Pennsylvania. And as a child, my favorite PE activity was when we would have kind of a free play time and the gym teacher wasn't paying attention and I could go hide on the stage and not do anything and be alone.
That feels like something that would have been my favorite game, not from you, Zach.
This is before I knew what Major Depression was and the way that I manifested it as a child. I'm sorry, you said poor game, and I went in a very different direction. Kickball, yay!
Well, you know, we can go with game sort of widely interpreted.
Yeah.
So I asked about this because we've been talking about climate change. We've been thinking about how it is that we talk about the actions that we take as individuals and whether that feels hopeful or meaningless. Does it feel like something that we want to talk about how it is that we can contribute to solving the big sorts of global problems that we're encountering today. And as it turns out, this is something that I've been working on a lot recently, and I have an axe to grind against most of the environmental folk out there, particularly the scientist environmental folk is who I like to grind my axe against, mostly because I tend to find that there's this pervading idea that if we just hit people with enough facts, they'll suddenly start acting better. So if you just know how bad the things you're doing are for the earth, you'll change your habits. And while that may work for a couple of people, like Zach, who, eats bugs now, for most folks...
and other things.
and other things.
Bug bars.
This doesn't need to become a John the Baptist kind of situation.
Taco chocolate.
Right. I think for most people that isn't actually enough, that we have to think more widely about how it is that we want to change people's actions if what we're really interested in is affecting lasting change. And so, like all good academics, that means I wrote a book because that's, I don't know, like what we do. And I have been thinking about this in terms of the importance, particularly, I have been thinking particularly in terms of the importance of play, and why we need to maybe emphasize playful solutions to environmental problems. So a part of the book that is important to
Tell
me.
us the title of this book,
Oh
Adam.
God. So it's called Living with Tiny Aliens. Ooh. I don't remember what this. No, it's Living with Tiny Aliens: The Image of God for the Anthropocene. So the book.
There'll of course be a link in the show notes.
I'm sure there will. Please don't inflict.
I'm glad you pronounce it Anthropocene, by the way, instead of Anthropocene.
You're welcome.
It's a new word, and so we gotta push that pronunciation because it's so much better.
I have trouble saying Anthropocene. See, I can't even do it now.
Our children will thank us.
So the book as a whole, like, works from astrobiology and some issues in Christian theology about the image of God, and then some work that's been done in environmental studies around the Anthropocene. But the end of the book is really trying to think about this issue that I feel a lot, which is that all of the little tiny things that I can do to maybe help mitigate things like climate change or environmental disaster don't mean a hill of beans of difference. So why would anybody continue to do that? And so I thought a lot about play as the reason that my children seem to do all the stuff that they do, which feels like a sort of leap, but go with me here for a second. So I tell a story that my students seem to like or they find really flummoxing, about being in the yard with my son playing catch. And my son was about 3, maybe 4 at this time. And there was a large maple tree in the yard where we lived. And so we were playing catch and throwing it back and forth, which, if you've played catch with a 4-year-old, means you throw the ball and they sort of like wander after it eventually because no one actually catches it. And then they also throw it. And that's a generous description of what happens. But they try. And so we were working on this, and I had thrown the ball a number of times, and it was rolling, and it rolled behind him, and it rolled up against this maple tree. And if you know anything about maple trees, they have really shallow root systems. So they tend to sort of stick out of the ground, and it's kind of knobby, and they're beautiful trees, but tripping hazards. And that is exactly what happened. My son went and ran for the ball. He caught a root, and it was like something out of Tom and Jerry, like full pancake to the ground, splayed out, bug on a windshield style. And I tried not to laugh, mostly, and waited to see if there was going to be that, deep intake of breath and scream. And there wasn't. So then I was like, okay, now I can laugh a little bit more, and that's okay. And then he hopped up and went over to get the ball. I thought we were just going to continue to play, but all of a sudden he hauled off and kicked the tree. And I was taken aback by this. One, I was afraid he was going to break his toe or something. But also, as I'm watching this, I kind of went, this feels like a good teaching opportunity, because that is what I live for. And I said, Henry, why did you kick the tree? And Henry looked at me a little bit like I had rocks in my head and said, it tripped me. And I said, well, the tree was here. You just tripped over it. And we don't kick living things. This is not how we treat other things in the world. It's important to respect the tree. And again, continuing to look at me like I had rocks in my head, which is a look I've now gotten used to, he just flat out said, well, it's just a dumb tree, Dad. And there was this sort of moment, for me at least, of recognizing that on the one hand, I don't agree with my 4-year-old in this case. But also this sort of awareness of saying, but that is a very natural reaction, I think, right? It's hard to appreciate a tree or think about it as deserving a certain sense of respect in our sort of everyday encounters with things. And even by the time my son was 4 and doing all sorts of weird and crazy imaginative things, the idea that he should respect a tree the same way he would his friend was already sort of foreign. So as we were continuing to talk about this, right, I asked him, I was like, hey, well, you wouldn't haul off and kick your friend who tripped you. And his immediate response was, no, but my friend can talk to me. And I kind of went, well, fair. That is a good categorical distinction. And yet, I want us to think about why it is that we choose to respect certain things or not others. And that led me to thinking more about play. And the reason I thought about play was because when we play, all of the real world rules kind of get to disappear, at least for a moment or a little while, as long as we're playing. And we get to make things up. And maybe I'm just a depressed college professor, but I feel like that ability is disappearing. And to me, if I think about the environmental crisis, if I think about the sort of issues that we've been talking about climate change, I think what scares me the most is the lack of imagination and the lack of a willingness to play and try new solutions. Right? Mm. So like, as much as I give Zach a hard time about eating bugs, on the one hand, right? On the other hand, I'm deeply respectful of that as the way of sort of opening up a discussion about climate change. Because I think that's a really, in a certain sense, playful idea, right? And then pulling that over into everyday life after sort of teasing that out. There is part of me, despite all of my, depressing things about starfish and things that we've talked about in past episodes, still holds on to some hope that those instances of play are really, really important and can be really important in terms of thinking about how we solve the climate crisis. So that was longer than I thought, but here's where I'm going with this. I am curious what you all think if you could imagine with no limits at all, how you would solve the climate crisis. What would you do?
You said no limits.
No limits, no rules, anything that you want, as wild or crazy a solution as you can possibly come up with.
So I'm allowed to summon Captain Planet.
You are allowed to summon Captain Planet in this case.
Okay, so while the other two are thinking, and I'm just going to divert my answer to the the dead air, which Zach will shrink down for our listeners at
God
home.
Bless him.
But there was a bit there, and I'm just buying you time, is because I think you're completely right about the lack of play in our intellect. And I don't know if that's excuse me, I don't know if that's adults, that's just one of the things that happens when you pass adolescence, or if that's something society has also sort of sapped out of us. We certainly see a little bit of that removal of imagination and imaginative play as schooling happens. So I think we're just modeling your concern. And with that, maybe Zach or Kendra has an actual answer for you.
Yeah, well,
I'm formulating.
I would love to see a more of a return to the color green. And by that, I mean things that are alive and that are absorbing sunlight and that require maintenance and interaction. One of the most wonderful environmental liturgies that I participate in on a daily basis is maintaining my worm bin in my kitchen. And every day after dinner, my sons, especially my 2-year-old, will say, "Daddy, help worm, help worm." Because he loves to do this. He loves to take all of the fruits and vegetables they didn't eat and all the cuttings that we didn't use because they're yucky and they got stems in them, and to feed them to the worms, who scurry out of the way when I take the top off because they don't like light. And then they eat it, and the next time we open it up, those things aren't there anymore, or they're much smaller. And then when that bin fills up and we put a new one on top and we usher them upward into the new bin, we take that old bin full of worm castings and we put it on our garden. And then we water our garden and spread it around, and those worm castings become the food that we grow for the next year. And that cycle, which feels revolutionary but is just so absolutely fundamental to the human experience for the past several million years, that connects me to something deeper, that makes the prospect of eating crickets less absurd, or of not maintaining my perfect lawn, right? How much wasted space I have out there. And my front yard has 2 giant trees on it, and it faces west. So it is the worst location for grass. It only gets sunlight for about an hour in the evening, which is, if you're going to get a little bit of sunshine, you want it in the morning to get rid of the dew. And all the tree roots, they take up all the nutrients and everything. So it's a horrible place for grass. But the previous owners really wanted to have a perfectly manicured lawn. So they have just destroyed the soil, trying to grow something that doesn't want to grow there, because there's no connection to what the earth wants and what the earth is doing. And so I've just kind of let it go feral a little bit. I've planted clover. I've encouraged the creeping Charlie and the dandelions, and because the dandelions, they have those deep tap roots that pull up calcium from the deep parts of the soil. The clover help fix the nitrogen levels, and they can survive around the giant roots of my ash tree, and they love it. And my yard is greener than ever and full of weeds. And I'm sure my neighbor hates me because those weeds, quote unquote, are starting to encroach on her territory, which is a perfectly manicured lawn. But like that connection to what lives and what grows it's a spiritual connection for me. And so if I could change one thing about the way that we live, it would be that. It would be, instead of having perfectly manicured lawns of turf grass that you never use, let's grow crops on our yard that we ourselves can eat. Let's make the roofs of our buildings into wildflowers that can sustain the bees and the insect population. Let's turn our skyscrapers into vertical farms. And then all of the space that we are saving out in the factory farms, we can lay fallow and just let nature have some of the world back. And I think just letting nature take over and reconnecting us to that which is green and brown and living and dying would be, I don't want to say enough, but it sure would be something.
I think that is very beautiful and very different than the plan that I am formulating. Because I'm over here thinking like, okay, my plan's going to require me to be very powerful and very rich so that I can punish people for using the things that destroy the earth. Tax all the plastic. No, ban all the plastic. And you get like tax write-offs if you go the extra mile to like, I don't know, grow things. And I think that also in this imaginary universe where I am ruler of the universe, I would write laws and force cities to have more green spaces and take advantage of, space in a more environmentally friendly way. And if you don't do that, then you're punished. My plans rely on a lot of punishment.
All right, Kendra the dictator.
So yeah, I don't have like a super well thought out plan. I just know I'm going to punish a lot of people. Because that works
so well.
It's not the
and
worst.
And people will hate me. But the earth will be saved.
And you'll be rich and powerful. You won't care.
Yeah, I won't care.
That's right.
Well, I think in my imagination, it's not nearly as poetic and lovely as Zach's, and nor is it as kind of evil and manipulative as far as I go.
But much more realistic.
Actually, completely unrealistic. Mine is now the unrealistic, right? We joked about having Captain Marvel show up or someone. I think, for me, if we were to completely, no holds, no limitation, I can't think of magic. That doesn't work for me. But I'd like to get rid of anything, any structure that is not a single family dwelling. And for me, I say it like that because if you don't have a skyscraper, you don't need to dig for the, make the steel. You don't need to have the plastic that goes into your drywall. You don't need to destroy the forests that go into framing the building. You don't need all the resources that go into it. And if you don't have a skyscraper, then you don't need to have these major corporations that need to exist in the same location, which means that we're far more in tune with our proximity culture as opposed to a global culture. And we get back to what we see and what we experience and our senses rather than solely our intellect. And by removing all of those things, I think we can do far better with each other. And then we realize that it's really hard to just live by oneself, and maybe we'll go back to generational living, which I think is a tremendous loss that our American society has gotten rid of for the most part. Now, I say that, and
that sounds terrible.
I guess it depends on your generation.
In theory. No, it doesn't depend on your generation. It depends on the generations above and below you. Right, maybe you choose someone else's grandparents. I don't know. I didn't say it had to be your grandparents, just someone's grandparents. You don't like your kids today, use someone else's kids. I don't know. Who am I to judge?
Well, generational living made a lot more sense when everyone was a farmer. And you had a family farm that could sustain your generations, that you inherited that land, you worked that land, you lived there. And now, we have to chase our jobs now.
But that's in American society. If you look at still non-agricultural places, I'm thinking Japan, where there's still a lot of generational living. Right? Intergenerational living, I suppose, is the accurate term. Right? And that's not because they're still agricultural. Right. So I don't think it's just that. I think it is our we're independent and you can do it on your own and pull yourself up by your bootstraps and you shouldn't need help from anybody. And it's sort of like, I would love to just leave my house with my husband and not my child at some time. But I have to keep my child safe. And we don't have any family within hundreds of thousands, thousands of miles from us. And I think we miss something because of that. We miss different independences. So my radical climate crisis fix would be to tear down all of the large structures that exist in the world and everything that falls from that. So Adam, you asked the question.
Are there aliens involved in your answer?
Yeah, not letting you off the hook this time.
Yeah, we're not your students, so we can just nag at you until you actually answer.
Usually that's the point where
You're
can
not
just
my
move
real
on
dad.
and nobody asks.
I can add something to my dictatorship if you'd like.
Yeah, no, that would be great.
Are you going to kill half
awesome.
the population?
Actually, this isn't really a dictator move. This is more like a rich, wealthy elite move. Because, I would have all the money. That's, I guess, another conversation. But in my world where I have all the money, I would just, take a huge lump sum of my billions and billions of dollars and say, this is a prize for whoever can actually come up with more sustainable ways of using energy. I mean, we already have a lot of sustainable ways, but to make those more accessible and easier to implement across like the broader society. And so if you can come up with a way to do that that's cheap and will help us stop relying so much on the things that are destroying us, then you can have billions of dollars out of my wealthy mansion and deep pockets. Just make it a competition. I'm just saying, people respond to money.
They do.
They do.
Less so to worms and dandelions over here.
I guess if I lived in my, world with no rules where I could make things up, I have two that I think I would implement. I could probably think of more, but I can think of two right off the bat. So the first one is everybody gets healthcare. Mostly because my sort of bit there would be to say, like, I think we spend so much time worrying and desperately afraid of what is going to happen to us if we don't have access to what is literally a life-saving system. And getting access to it is so difficult that it prevents us from asking the sorts of questions about climate change and environment that maybe we could ask if we were a little less worried. So that's one.
Wow.
And then the other is I would cap the size of all cities at 6,000 people.
6,000?
Yes.
Goodness gracious. That is not a city.
It is not a city.
That fits perfectly with my plan.
I know,
and
right?
Zach's even.
It's true. I mean,
and
other
mine.
Not at all. Not at all. This dictator.
Kendra, Master of the Universe, will require us all to live in communes of 6,000. No, I think one of the other things that I think a lot about, and if I had, sort of my druthers, is this idea that, like, I feel like when people get anonymous, it's hard to feel like you care for them. Whereas when I have to look at the smelly, stinky face of my neighbor, it maybe helps. I'm not convinced that's true all the time. But at the very least, I feel like when I'm dealing with 6,000 people instead of a couple of 100,000 or 1 million, which is like a number that I can barely even like really fathom, frankly, I feel like I would be more willing to work on their behalf.
But why? Where did you get this idea of 6,000?
I don't know. I just like that number.
Why? Okay.
I have no particular reason. Really what I should have done is like look up like there
because that's the size
there
of
have
your
been
town?
some like well no, my town's 3,000, so we're square under. But there have been anthropological studies about ideal size groups in terms of how many folks people can quote unquote truly be friends with.
Right, that's what we talked about a while ago, like Dunbar's number.
Yeah, right. So this is sort of part of my sort of sense, and I think that's a sort of flexible number, but I look at this a little bit, and it is really like living in a small town has made me appreciate very differently than I did like growing up in larger, more urban areas of what lengths I would go to try and help out someone, even somebody who I don't really know, because they live here. Which I did not have as a sensibility in other places that I've been. Or if I did, it was like because of it was like a more restrictive community within that area.
And I think I also live in a small town. My town is not nearly as small. It has quite a few stoplights.
And more than one internet line?
I love our lack of
2.
stoplights.
I think 2, and we're at like 25 megabyte download. If you're lucky. One day. So, but, Hendersonville itself has a population of about 14,000, which, sizably bigger than Adams, but still a small town compared to most other places. And in that way, I go all over our town, and sometimes I go for myself, and sometimes I go to sit with congregants for moral support or other reasons. So one day I was meeting someone at a courthouse, and anytime you go into a courthouse, you have to put all of your belongings so that they can scan it. And then you go through a metal detector. And so I put all my stuff through, went through the metal detector, and it beeped, which meant I had to be wanded. And who comes over but a congregant? And a congregant is a volunteer sheriff who happened to be on shift that day. And my congregant is the one who has to wand me. And there's a whole different level of understanding who you're dealing with when you meet people at the doctor's office or the courthouse or the grocery store. And they're like, oh, what are you buying today? Oh, it looks like you're shopping for a lot of people. Are you having a party? I think that kind of lack of anonymity can be helpful in some ways. It can be stifling in other ways.
Oh, yes.
But I see what you're saying, Adam, and I used to live in the Denver area, which has a metro of like metro population of about 3 million. So I don't know exactly what it was when I left. So a large number. And when we would get together and we would be in New York together, I never felt so alone as I did while wandering the streets of New York. And I never feel that here in Hendersonville. And for the most part, that's a nice feeling.
So one of the ways that people are trying to correct both this feeling of anonymity and the disconnection from the rest of life that so awfully defines the Anthropocene is through expanded community gardens, and in lots of cases, guerrilla gardens. This is something I was involved with in Philly because
Can you describe what that is?
Oh yeah, there are so many abandoned lots that are owned by the city, or because somebody had lived there and they couldn't pay the taxes, and so there's a lien against it, and the city just owns it, and they don't want to let people on there because they want to get money off of it. And in the future, maybe some hotshot New York developer will come and make this some hipster spot, and they want to be able to make money off of it. And so they will not release it to communities. They won't make these things into parks or anything like that. And so, my church and folks connected to us, we would just take over without asking anyone's permission, and would clean up the lots, test soil, would cleanse soil, would build raised beds, would build gates, and would then give out spots to local people in the communities. So you're bringing some life into some of the most blighted areas in the city. You're creating a space where people come together and they get to know each other, and you're creating a consumable good that then you don't need to purchase from another place, which is reducing carbon footprints and whatnot. And a lot of times what would happen would be, once that area was cleaned and preserved and beautiful, that's when the city would come in and say, like, you need to get off of this property that we didn't care about until this moment that you did all the work for us. And sometimes they'd fight it, sometimes they'd just go off and find another lot. Or we used to build these seed bombs. Where you would take this ball of dirt and clay and fertilizer and make these balls out of it with white clover seed in it, and sometimes sunflower seed, and throw them over fences into areas that were abandoned, and in some cases with ground full of lead and other heavy metals, because white clover will cleanse soil, as will sunflowers. Mm-hmm. And so you add a little bit of life, cool. You give a little bit of food and environment for the local insect population. So you help to support the food tree of whatever animals can thrive in the city, and you beautify a little bit. And it also kind of raises awareness to those spots that you would normally you are trained not to look at. So my sister's doing a lot of this in Camden, New Jersey, and teaching kids about sustainable farming and living, and going one step further than just the garden, but transforming it into urban farms and doing a lot more sustainable work. They're making hot sauce and raising bees and all of that, which, by the way, Kendra, with all of your money and everything, one of the tricks that the super rich people do is they have a beehive on their property, because then they can technically list their property as farmland. And
Perfect.
So all of
Done.
those rich billionaires have a beehive. So make sure you do that.
I will.
You don't want to
Thank
pay
you
taxes.
for the advice.
Although I do have to say that in order for it to be considered a farm, it does have to make at least $1,000 a year.
Good to know.
So,
All
yeah.
right,
So
done.
it's not. So
And
you
if
can
it
you
doesn't,
might
I'll
be able to
just,
claim it.
Buy it.
Pretend that I made $1,000.
Use one of your shell companies to purchase $1,000 worth of honey.
I mean, since
There
you
you go.
have, although I do have to say the way that you described this, Zach, a seed bomb does feel like it fits Kendra's dystopia environmentalism. Just vigilante environments throwing seed bombs everywhere.
Yeah, with bandanas covering your face so nobody knows who you are.
I mean,
This is the world we live in.
environmentalists. That's what you've described, and I can't.
I'm okay with that.
But so, like, I think what's interesting to me, and why I like asking about like what happens when you start taking away rules, right? Is some of the things that like that you all are describing, right? Like, one, you can laugh about it, which is not generally what we do when we talk about climate crisis. Fair, we should not generally laugh about it, but that's important.
Yeah.
It's important not to just sort of be overwhelmed by it, but two, right? Like, I think we actually sort of start imagining really interesting things we can really do when we start letting go of what the rules are. We know we're supposed to do things this way, but if we let the rules go for a while, suddenly there are these other possibilities that start to emerge that we sort of play with, that percolate, that come up, and they don't seem so unfathomable anymore, right? Like, seed bombs, on the face of it, sounds fairly weird and unfathomable. And yet, I'm pretty sure Kendra will be walking around Boston throwing seed bombs pretty soon.
It's what birds do every time they poop.
Wait, what did you say?
This is what birds do every time they poop. The seeds from the things they ate are mixed in with their fertilizer, and
They're
they
not
drop
doing
them in
it
random places.
intentionally. I think
Look,
that's the point you're missing.
I'm using nature as an inspiration for acts of rebellion against the death of society. We are.
You're back to your teenage angst sound.
I never left it.
I just Googled where to buy seed bombs. You can get them all over the place. Etsy,
You can make
Tell
them
me
too.
Amazon is selling them, because that would be the irony of ironies.
Oh man,
Yep,
you
Amazon.
should get yourself a VPN.
Our finest seed bomb matrix. Found at Amazon.com.
Who has pledged to be a totally carbon neutral company, right, in the next 15, 20 years? So
Yeah. This is just their way of starting. But I think the other thing that it does, like, besides like, one, helping us laugh and not feel depressed, but two, is this idea that, like, when I hear all the stories that you're telling, right, there's a certain sense in which there's an empathy that gets developed, right, as part of letting go of these rules. And I think that was, for me, that's what's like struck me, like, when I watch my kids play, right, is like, I mean, true, kids do like really stupid and cruel stuff to each other. Let's just be clear. They're not like saints. Read Augustine. One can be clear that children are sinful. But like,
I'd rather not read Augustine if I can help it.
But, sorry, this is a tangent, but like it is like my favorite part of Augustine when he makes the justification that infants are sinful because they cry. And I'm like, I feel that way. Right now, I 100% feel that way. Every time my child cries in the middle of the night, I'm like, you selfish bastard, go back to sleep.
Adam has a newborn at home.
So, I love you, Linus. Right, so
Start saving for therapy now.
That's right. That's right. So what I think about though, like, is in these moments where kids are playing with each other, right? They are sort of creating these links, these moments of empathy where they start to really care and feel. I like to use the term "feel with," right? Feel with their neighbor, right? Feel with the person that they're playing with. That something about that play makes that person, even though it's totally unreal to play, makes that person more real to them. And that is a piece that I think gets lost in the climate conversation, and when we talk about how we want to make solutions. So my favorite, I've been holding this one back, but like my favorite solution is this piece that the person who used to be the campus pastor here at Bethany, she's great. She runs the Lutherans Restoring Creation group for our area of the church, the Synod in this place. And if you go on their website, one of the things that is like suggested is something churches can do is put local wildlife into the directory. And I ran across this by accident as I was looking for like playful solutions and this kind of thing. But I was like, wait, what? That's kind of brilliant. I mean, if all of a sudden, right, you're looking for, Adam Pryor in the directory and instead you first come to prairie chicken, I think there's something that's like good about that, right? And it's meant to be this sort of like consciousness raising exercise, right? The same way that we're talking about which rules apply, right? This is playfully breaking a rule in order to help us feel with other folks. And as silly as it sounds, there's a part of me that says like those are the sorts of things that do actually really matter. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. This is as hopeful as I am ever going to get on this podcast, by the way. So you better like hang on to it because it's never coming back. But
there's a woodpecker that keeps eating the side of my church and gnawing holes in it. Well, tapping holes, drilling holes into it, because once you get through the stucco, there's just this lovely insulation in there. And right outside of my window of my office, and we fill the hole and then it makes a new one in another place. And we put up we hung CDs from our gutters. We put up fake owls. We've done everything except for hire a local falconer to come and hunt the thing, because under the Migratory Birds Act, you can't put anything up that would harm it.
Have you tried throwing a seed bomb at it?
I'm thinking about just baptizing it and calling it a member, and then I'll only have to deal with it a few times a year. But
just make sure he goes in the directory. Yeah. But I'm one of the things that I am like particularly interested in right now are like curating these crazy ideas. And I feel like I spend a lot of my time with college students who don't want to talk about crazy ideas because they're like, I want to know what the solution is to this problem. Let's just move on. And I'm like, no, that's not how this works. We're going to spend the next hour talking about all of the crazy ideas that you might have about what it is that we could do. So for instance, right, like I spent like an hour about a month ago with students talking about, would it work or not work to cover the Sahara Desert in solar panels?
Oh, I've seen that idea.
Yeah. This is like actually like an MIT study that was sort of put forward, right? But like on the face of it, that sounds bonkers. And yet,
I think it sounds amazing.
But why?
Europe has a long history of stealing from Africa. I mean, there's precedent for this.
Right? Like, but I think like opening up, thinking about how it is that we get out of the rut of thinking about what's the next solution, and can I take some time in order to just playfully imagine like something that sounds totally outlandish. I think there's still a lot of value in that.
Have you heard of any of these solutions for storing energy that are super crazy and outlandish and wonderful? Because, out west where you've got tons of sunlight all day long, forever, but you can have solar, but then nighttime comes and you need electricity, and you can just recharge batteries, I guess, but batteries don't scale very well. And so they're trying to figure out other things that they could do to store energy. And so they've taken some inspiration from old like clock mechanisms and in harnessing gravity. So there was one somewhere out in the desert where during the day all surplus electricity would be put into a train, and that train would be driven up a hill, and then at night they would slowly let the train down the hill, and the wheels would generate electricity, and then people could take from that.
I love this already.
Right? There was another one where they used surplus electricity to pump water up an abandoned water tower and then let it cycle through in the evening. There was another one that was super crazy where they pumped air into an abandoned salt mine and pressurized a salt mine and then used that air coming out afterwards to generate electricity, because our
farting mines is really what they're doing.
Yeah, exactly. Salty farting mines.
Oh, yes.
Because our grid is developed for power on demand, not for power storage. So we can't handle surges or depletions. And so that's why coal works so well. You just burn more, burn less. Right. There's all of these wacky ideas that people are doing to figure out better ways we can store excess energy, because the answer to our problem is not just going to be more windmills and solar panels, because we don't have, we're kind of already at capacity for that. We're not designed, our electric system is not designed for that sort of energy production. And so we have to come up with other solutions of energy storage if we're going to move forward with green energy, which is one of the super exciting things about the new nuclear generators that have just been developed. The new generation of nuclear generators actually can run off of the spent fuel from the last generation. And so all of that spent nuclear fuel that we don't know what to do with, that's in the rest of the salt mines out in Utah, we can then take that and have free energy, which burns clean. And you just have to convince people that it's safe enough and not to think about Fukushima and 3 Mile Island. And
well, good thing we didn't shoot that into space, because that was originally a plan.
Also, all of these ideas would be really competitive candidates for my $1 billion grant for environmentally friendly energy.
I'm all in. And I would spend all my money on clovers, and I would spread them on everyone's lawn who thinks that clovers are a weed, because they are the best plant in the world. Wait, you will just have bunnies and bees all the time.
Can we have a listener competition for the most crazy, playful idea?
Yes.
And they'll win Kendra's billions of dollars from her dystopian universe?
I will make a certificate that looks like a $1 billion bill and mail it to the winner.
I love it. I absolutely love it. And somehow makes me think there's going to be a unicorn on the front of that.
I think there now has to be, but only a unicorn that has only an angry unicorn who has saddlebags full of seed bombs,
and angry eyebrows.
Yeah, of course,
like Charlie the unicorn.
Oh, yeah, no, I totally think we should. This is like our open call to listeners to
that's right.
Send
it over to us.
The most playful idea you have for dealing with climate change. And you might win billions of dollars. Fake billions of dollars, but billions of dollars.
In Kendra bucks.
In Kendra bucks.
Kendra bucks, that's it. What I love about this exercise, Adam, is that one of the things that I do is teach engaged couples how to talk to each other. Right, because most of us don't really know how to talk to each other.
I'm just saying there were a lot of places I thought this could go. This is not one of them.
Hashtag clergy life.
I am ready.
So, most of us, when in relationship with another person, right, an intimate relationship with someone else, we will have a fight, and often we will have a disagreement, and it'll be the same disagreement. Everyone here is married, right? Everyone on this podcast is married, and I can say for certain that we all have probably fights with our spouses, and it's probably the same fight that you've been having since you've known each other. Because it's like the one thing that just it'll show itself up in various ways. And for those that can't see, Kendra's nodding like, "Yep, this is you're speaking my tune." But
it's tough to decide who gets to go under the parachute, right?
Yeah, exactly. Oh, I'm sorry, Zach. Do you and your wife have a completely perfect, never have?
That's a trick question. Don't answer that, Zach.
I'm sorry. We've never had a disagreement about anything, especially not petty things like me forgetting how to function as an adult. These things don't happen.
Yeah.
No,
yeah, never,
we're perfect.
Never. And especially since, especially since, you of course would never fight over parenting styles or even small petty parenting.
We have perfect kids. Why would we do that?
Of course.
No.
So having said that, one of the things that I like to do is this exact same thing that you're talking, Adam, and saying, take something that's a challenge for you and brainstorm every wacky idea that ever exists and bring humor into it and bring levity and bring realism and bring everything possible and make a tremendously long list. And I tell them they have to come back to me with 20 different things to try. And 20 is a lot of things to try, right? And maybe somewhere in that 20, there's one that works. So we might be laughing over this, but seed bombs and solar panels and hydroelectricity
and billion-dollar grants
and billion-dollar unicorn bills and Captain Marvel coming to save our universe, our planet, right? Whatever it is, I think that's the exercise. And you got it right on the head that we get so stuck in our woe is us. This is always going to be a fight. This is always going to be something that causes us tension, and we don't know how to fix it. So we'll just live with it. We don't want to live with the climate crisis. We want to make it not exist. We want to bring it down so that the next generations can brainstorm over their stupid fights. So I think I'm loving this exercise, and I just got to say I'm loving the optimism that Adam is demonstrating, because it's a rare treat for all of us.
One time only.
Yeah, I feel like I maybe absorbed some of Adam's pessimism in this episode. A little bit today. I did not anticipate that today I would become a dictator, but that's where we are.
I gotta say, that was the second most unexpected thing that happened during this episode, was that when I asked people to be playful, dictator was not one of the games that I thought anyone here would choose.
Yeah. She's the pessimism Clover, who is fixing the pessimism levels in the soil, redistributing them.
Everything needs to be balanced out.
Yeah.
The world wants to be in equilibrium. Right, that's
as all things should be.
That's right. Now
let's bring Thanos back into this.
Dude.
What? Perfectly balanced, as all things should be.
Yeah, but he's truly evil, so that's not okay.
He made some good points. This has been episode 27 of the Down the Wormhole podcast. I want to give a huge shout out to all of our Patreon supporters, but especially this week, Mark Bloom and Ruth Shaver. You people are amazing, and you are some of the reasons why we do this. So check it out if you're interested at patreon.com/downthewormholepodcast if you want to get in on some of them sweet, sweet perks. Speaking of perks, we were not kidding about that $1 billion idea. You can hit us up this week on all the social medias, links in the show notes, or send us an email at admin@downthewormhole.com, also in the show notes. We will judge your submissions on a purely arbitrary standard according to which one we like best that day, however we're feeling. You know, the way that most grants seem to be awarded. But anyway, send us your best ideas to fix the climate crisis and you could be internet famous and fake rich. Tune in next week as our benevolent dictator Kendra asks how religiosity affects one's views on climate change. Spoiler alert, we may all be hypocrites, but maybe that's okay? Find out next week. Until then, don't forget
to
That's right.
send
it over to us.
the most playful idea you have for dealing with climate change, and you might win billions of dollars. Fake billions of dollars, but billions of dollars.
in Kendra bucks.
In Kendra bucks.
That's it.